Hi, this is Steve Albini, and you're listening to Whatever, Never Mind.
Never mind.
Well, what can I do? What can I tell you?
All right. Well, I'm talking to. Let me welcome to the program, Steve Albini. I got your name. That's the proper pronunciation for your last name, Albini?
Yep.
Of course, from Big Black, owner of Electrical Audio Studios in Chicago. And well, do you still not like the term producer? Is that accurate?
Well, I mean, it doesn't accurately describe what I do. That's all. It's not a big deal.
Okay.
I mean, people use all kinds of terms for all kinds of things. My preference would be to be called an engineer, just because that's, technically more accurate, but it's not a big deal.
Okay, well, fair enough. Producer, engineer, Steve Albini. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Nirvana and your work with their album In Utero. But before we get into that a little bit, can you just give me just a little bit about yourself? What drew you into music, I guess, initially? How far back you want to go or whatever direction you want to take, where you decided that was kind of going to be your path?
When you're a teenager, you're interested in a lot of different things, and you never really know which of those, you don't know which of those is going to be your life,
mm-hmm.
right? But music spoke to me kind of especially, and when I got to college and I got involved in the music scene here in Chicago, it sort of shaped a lot of my thinking, and I started to adapt more and more of my life to suit my interest in music. Like, I had a job, but I was always careful to make sure that my job provided me enough free time that I could work on music in my free time, and that I could take vacations as needed to go on tour and things like that. And that was just part and parcel of being in a band.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're in a band, your social circle and your peer group is all other musicians and other people in bands. And so all the people that I hung out with were in bands. And my band wanted to make recordings of itself for posterity or whatever. So I got charged with making the recordings of my own band. And once I did that, then I had a minimal skill set that would be useful to my friends who were also all in bands. And so then I started recording all of my friends' bands. And then the more I did that, the more I sort of gravitated toward that as a sideline or as a semi-professional, serious pastime.
Well, now...
And eventually it became a profession.
Going back to when you first started recording, then what kind of setup were you using? Like, how would you actually physically record these things? Did you have like a Tascam 4-track, or was it more...
In the very beginning, I would rent a 4-track reel-to-reel recorder. Most music shops, or most large music shops in the day, had a little setup that they would rent out to people to record demos in their rehearsal rooms. It would be a reel-to-reel tape machine, a small mixer, some microphones, and you could rent that little package for $50 for the weekend or whatever. And then, that was sort of routine. I would do that. I would rent that equipment. Like when I was a teenager in Montana, before I moved to Chicago, the local guitar shop had a little package like that they would rent out. And then when I got to Chicago, there were several music shops in Chicago that would rent a similar package for you. And then over time, I started to acquire equipment of my own. My band, the band I was in at the time, Big Black, we're going to do a recording session for what constituted our last album. And we realized that we could either spend a couple $1,000s in the studio, or we could spend that couple $1,000s buying some recording equipment, and then we would have it sort of forever. And if we did that, then we wouldn't have to spend any more money ever again,
It's kind of amazing. Larger bands with much more money don't come to that conclusion at some point. Some do.
Currently, I mean, now in the digital era, getting recording equipment is a lot easier because there relatively good recording equipment is available in sort of commercial level or consumer level music stores or online or whatever. And then the software that people use to record is pretty ubiquitous. So now it's much easier. But at the time, you had to, there was you had to have a little bit of savvy, and you had to have a little bit of patience to rig everything up. But it was by no means difficult. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it. I mean, I don't do anything hard.
Well, honestly, the process of learning how to actually properly function a reel to reel, and then getting it to a format that you can pass around cassette, or I don't know how quickly in your timeline you would have been doing anything on vinyl, but there's something there.
Yeah, I mean, the ambition was always to make a record. At the time, making records was pretty rare. It was an expensive enterprise to press up a record, and then you would, then you had no promise that anyone would ever hear it, and there was no, there was no easy distribution means. You had to sort of finagle distribution for the records in the same way that you would finagle gigs if you were an unknown band. You had to talk record stores into taking them. Some record stores would take them on consignment after you'd sold a few, or if you'd gotten some reviews or some attention in the underground press, then you could sell some to distributors or distant record stores by shipping them independently. But it was by no means easy to sell records, and so you had to invest all this money up front, and with no promise of getting it back. You had to to be diligent over the course of several years to break even.
Now, I'm speaking to you from St. Paul, Minnesota. Now, the Big Black, obviously kind of broke out of Chicago there. Did you, and around the same time that acts like Husker Du and the Replacements, did you ever do anything with those guys as far as shows, anything of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, those were sort of peer bands of ours. So, Husker Du, for example, Grant Hart from Husker Du was booking shows in the Twin Cities in the 80s, and he helped set up a show, one of the very first shows that my band played there, and he had us crash at his place. He was renting this big church. I want to say it was in St. Paul, that he was using as a crash pad for him and all of his friends, and his bands would practice there and that sort of thing. And so, we came up there to play, and we crashed at his place, and he sort of hosted us there, and we became friends with a number of bands in the Twin Cities. A lot of the bands that were associated with Husker Du, they had a record label, and they were putting bands out on their label, bands like Man-Sized Action and Rifle Sport, and all of those bands were friends of ours, and we developed a relationship with them where we would host them in Chicago, and they would host us in Minneapolis, and likewise. And then eventually, one of those bands, Rifle Sport, I got involved in a cooperative record label, or a record label in Chicago that was that was a collective of small bands in Chicago called Ruthless Records, and eventually Rifle Sport from Minneapolis started putting their records out on the Ruthless label. And then when the Ruthless label dissolved in Chicago, Christopher Johnson, who was the vocalist of Rifle Sport, he took that over, and he started releasing Rifle Sport's records from Minneapolis on the Ruthless label. So there's quite a strong, there was always quite a strong sort of fraternal relationship between bands in Chicago and bands in Minneapolis.
And we're going back to a time when vinyl still had a pretty big stronghold. Were there a lot of manufacturing plants that were easy to find? It's a little different now, but I'm talking mainly Chicago, Twin Cities, the bigger city, the bigger metropolitans around the area here in the Midwest.
I mean, most recording studios would have a line on a place that you could use to independently press your records.
Okay.
So if you were recording at a proper recording studio, they could give you an introduction to a pressing plant, or a mastering studio that could then give you an introduction to a pressing plant, that sort of thing. Now it's dead easy to find on, you can find almost anything with a simple internet search. You can find people who will help you press any number of records from a few hundred to tens of thousands. So, but at the time, it did require a little bit of detective work, and everybody had their own recipe. Like, oh yeah, this place is great, but they charge too much for their labels, so you get your labels printed at a local place and ship them there. Or, oh yeah, this place, their quality isn't that great, but if you want small quantities, they're the cheapest. Or so through word of mouth, you would learn the sort of the tricks of the trade of getting a record released in a sort of an economical fashion.
What about like sonically? How important was like what you recorded to come across on? Because I know nowadays like vinyl mastering is a term that gets tossed around a lot. You had a very DIY ethos, obviously, as most punk bands at that time. Was there ever like cases where you just got them like, this sounds like shit, and you want to send it back to the, or did they always kind of come through? I guess I'm not sure.
Well, I mean. Right. Beggars can't be choosers, so we're talking about bands that were doing relatively small pressings on extremely limited budgets. So you didn't really have the luxury of choice. You would find a place that would be willing to make your records for you, and then you would send the tapes off and hope for the best. So independent bands and independent labels were not well served during that era. Independent labels that survived and developed a catalog of materials. I'm thinking of, say, Touch and Go out of Detroit, and they eventually moved to Chicago, or Wax Trax here in Chicago, for example, where you'd have a number of releases where you would be a repeat customer. Then everyone would have a reason to treat you better. Like the distribution company would then have a reason to pay you if they knew that there were going to be multiple releases on your label that they would want in their inventory, or the pressing plant, would want to give you good service if they knew that you had a number of titles coming out every year. That sort of thing. That was something that was aspired to by all of the independent labels, but it was achieved by a very small number of them.
That stuff always fascinates me. I just, because, I kind of, I'm a little younger than you, but I kind of came of age around that time. I was 13, 14 in the early 80s there. And, I got into the punk rock music that I could find. I was also in a small town, so it was a bit of a struggle there. But you touched on a little bit about how much easier it is to just set up a recording studio, basically. I'm in my basement in my house. I think I spent about maybe $2,000 and everything I got down here, as far as the recording and microphones and things. The music industry in general, though, has changed quite a bit. What are your thoughts on that? Because you basically have worked through quite a bit. I mean, what do you think of the way?
Well, in the part of the music industry that I worked in, the underground, the independent labels and the punk bands and the one-off record pressings and things like that was all very small scale stuff. That was sort of a hobbyist thing, bands would invest money in making a record not because it was a business enterprise, but because they hoped that would allow them to sustain their band, and they hoped that it would be a self-sustaining thing, right? Mm-hmm. That's a completely different motivation from the professional mainstream music business that was exploiting an audience and trying to sell, huge quantities of records.
That's a good point.
Yeah, as an industrial enterprise, So they're two completely different things. That big monolithic music industry no longer exists, or at least it no longer exists in the sense that it's not selling records anymore. So now the records that are being sold, if you go to a record shop now and look at their new releases, the majority of their new releases will be from small independent labels that have persevered in pressing records for a discriminating audience that wants to buy physical media, right? What would be the equivalent of the old big mainstream record labels are now sort of artist management enterprises where they have where they're managing all facets of an artist's career, and they will handle their online and television presence, their video, their endorsements with clothing companies, or their affiliation with different products, or their music being used in tandem with a big production of some kind, like a game or a film or a television series. All of those things are the streams where money is changing hands. People are no longer physically buying that many records.
Yeah.
And so the small number of records that are being sold now are enough to support a niche industry of mom and pop record labels and mom and pop stores and independent studios like ours, where we're making records one at a time for people who are making records as a passion and as a part of their creative enterprise, rather than the sort of industrial scale project where you have record labels releasing dozens of records a month and selling millions of records a year. That scale of music business doesn't really exist anymore in those terms.
And do you think it's a good thing, or?
I mean, it's the way it is. It doesn't, there's no there's no margin in having, in being critical of it. It doesn't.
Come on.
It's like saying, well, the sunrise is coming up at 6. The sun's coming up at 6:30 tomorrow. Is that a good time? That's just that's when it's going to happen. So you don't really have an opinion on things as they are. They're just, that's the state of play, and that's what you have to deal with.
Don't you have a background in journalism? I'm trying to do a job here.
Yeah, I mean, I studied journalism in school, and I worked I wrote for fanzines and stuff like that. But I don't really qualify as a journalist.
Well, is it pointless to ask you what your thoughts on streaming are? Then I'm curious on that, I guess. But
I have a couple of I have divergent thoughts on streaming.
Okay, let's hear it.
In one sense, I think the convenience of streams is undeniable. At the moment, it's very easy for people to hear music all day without having to spend very much energy selecting the music. They can just sort of guide these streaming algorithms to play them music, and they will hear music. It's sort of it functions the way that radio did previously, where someone else was making decisions and playing music for you. But your choices, your preferences, can shape what you're listening to now to a much, much finer degree. Mm-hmm. Whereas previously you'd either listen to this radio station or that radio station, and that was it. And now you can search out playlists of the most, arcane thing, and, with minute specificity, you can listen to very specific things that suit you uniquely. And you can, spend all day listening to a very specifically crafted playlist that caters to your tastes, which is kind of incredible. Right? That was never the case. That was never really possible before. And
I would have loved it as a child, yeah.
Yeah, and you can go down a rabbit hole. Like, you can look for associated artists, or you'll find things that have been recommended by other people who are into the same things that you're into, and you'll find somebody who lives in a small town in Indiana who's deep into early Jamaican blue beat music or whatever, a kind of music that they may never have been exposed to during the physical media era, during the record era, just because there isn't likely to be a dub reggae specialty store in their part of the small town in Indiana or whatever. And so they would never have come across that kind of music. Whereas now, in a few seconds, you can get lost in an entire world of music that you would never have been exposed to otherwise. So I think that's amazing. The way the economics of those streams are set up now is, caters to the rights holders, that is, the big corporations that hold the majority of the intellectual property that's being streamed. And those big former record companies, who are now media companies, like those former record companies, get the lion's share of the benefit of the streaming income. So small and independent bands are once again, not benefiting from that as an income stream. But that's not really very different from when small and independent bands were not being played on the radio.
Right.
And so they weren't being paid radio royalties, and their records weren't being promoted by MTV or whatever, so they had to settle for being a niche artist, and they had to find their fans one at a time. Thankfully, it is now much easier to discover those fans one at a time than it has ever been, and bands can create a kind of a self-sustaining network with their audience where they're being directly supported by their audience, sometimes through things like Patreon and Kickstarter and other crowdfunding sources, and sometimes just by the fact that they've developed a rabid audience, and their audience is now faithfully buying every single thing they make, and every time they appear in public, they know that they're going to sell out. Like those kinds of relationships are now where most of the money changes hands for independent bands, whereas previously there was some record income and some touring income and a small amount of licensing income and that sort of stuff.
It does seem to be maybe there's a benefit for the independent artists, if I'm hearing you right.
Not really. I mean, well, in terms of equity, like it's no more equitable than the major label system was in terms of the artists getting their share of the money. There's a lot of money being thrown around. The money is mostly going to corporate players.
Exactly. But
through deals that have no relationship to the music being played, right? And that's same as it ever was. I think mercifully these streaming services are doomed, because what they are doing is they're providing a kind of a curated experience for the listener, right? And it seems like an inevitability that your playback hardware will be able to do that for you eventually as computing power gets greater and as the internet becomes more comprehensive. There's no reason that your phone can't find interesting music for you, rather than you having to rely on a service to find an interesting music for you. So I think that these streaming services are doomed, and they're a sort of a transitional form between the previous gatekeeper universe where you had to physically buy a record or CD in order to hear the music, and a new kind of unfettered universe where you can hear anything just by wanting to. I think that's the way it's ultimately going to pan out. You're going to be able to hear anything you want to hear just by asking for it. And what we have now is a kind of a throttled version of that operates through these streaming services.
There is clearly money there. I don't know the answer, but I mean, clearly that should be going to the artist. And it's not.
I mean, these
really
streaming services built themselves by acquiring access to catalogs of the rights holders. They acquired access to those catalogs by basically bribing those rights holders and saying, all right, we're going to give you the lion's share of this money. You know, you have equity in our company. We're going to pay you a preferential rate. Let us play your material. Let us play the material that you have rights to. And so the big rights holders said, okay, we'll take equity in your company and we'll take a preferential rate, and then you can have access to all of our material. So then they stream all that material, and those corporations that they struck deals with get the lion's share of the payout for what would have been the artist's share of the streaming income, right?
Yeah.
So anyone coming late to the game, a small band that has a few albums worth of material, is going to be treated much differently than the Warner BMG music group, which has billions or let's say hundreds of millions of available tracks to play. So that's why it's inequitable, is that you have big players and independent players, and the big players struck deals early on where they were, making significantly more money for the same service. And that's one of the reasons that it's going to collapse, because independent things that operate on a more equitable basis are going to eventually be preferred. Like the internet treats this kind of limitation of access as a kind of a fault and works to breach it, right? So if you can only hear a piece of music through one platform, the internet will eventually provide a way around that where you can hear it on all platforms. Yeah,
Right.
And you can consider that clandestine if you want to, because that's the mindset of the people who prefer the gatekeeper mentality. But it's just a natural product of the evolution of the internet. Like that's how the internet gets better, is that it provides more access to more things for more people.
Okay. One last thing before we get into In Utero. You've been recording for a long time, but you're also, considered very influential as your band Big Black and in other projects. But do you see yourself more as an engineer or producer, whichever term you prefer, or a musician?
Well, my day-to-day profession is that I'm a recording engineer. Like I come to the studio every day and I make records. I made a record today. I'm going to make a record tomorrow. That's what I do for a living, right? But since I was a teenager, I've been in a band, and that is my creative outlet. So I couldn't tell you which is more important to me. Being a recording engineer and running the studio Electrical Audio is my life's work, and that's what I am doing as a profession. But I love being in my band, and I cherish the time that we get to play. We haven't been allowed to play together very much since the global pandemic, of course. But
and this is Shellac, is that right?
Yeah, Shellac of North America is the band that I'm in now. I've been in other bands, but Shellac has been going for 25 years or so. Wow, more than that. Whew.
And just real quick, everything with COVID, you're healthy, your friends and stuff. Nobody came down with it, or? Oh
no, everybody knows somebody that's got it. Everybody knows somebody that's died of it.
Yeah, it wasn't the best question. I guess I meant just how are things, man?
It's awful.
Yeah, business wise too. I assume it had some of it a hit to your studio?
Yeah, it's been devastating to the entire band and music community. Like people can't play shows, they can't tour. It's not even safe to get together to rehearse, really.
Yeah.
So there's no income. Clubs can't operate, which means that there's no live venues for music. It's not safe for people to congregate, and we make our living in a congregate setting. So, yeah, it's been absolutely devastating.
Hopefully with the vaccine rolling out, things will turn around a little bit there. And also, I know that there was some legislation meant to help out like the performing industry as much, because you touched on it. It's not just the bands. We're talking clubs, the employees that work there. Even rigging companies for larger tours, that kind of stuff,
Yeah, musicians and entertainers make our livings in a crowd, and it's just not safe for crowds to assemble. And I think it's important that we appreciate that it isn't that we're not suffering because there are restrictions in place. That's not why we're suffering. We're not suffering because we're not allowed to tour or not allowed to have open music venues. We're suffering because there's been there's a global pandemic, and our response to it as a country has been abysmal. The lack of a federal response has meant that we've performed more poorly than any other developed country, and that is why we are suffering. We're not suffering because there are rules to prevent us from gathering. The rules are good. The rules prevent us from killing each other.
Yeah, and if anything, the rules maybe, if they were followed a little more stringently, would get us back on the path to opening things up again sooner.
Yeah, if we had bitten the bullet at the beginning of the pandemic and said, okay, everybody stays home for 2 months, we'll pay all your bills, just everybody stay home, don't go anywhere, don't go to work, don't do anything, don't interact with anybody, then we wouldn't have seen this long, terrifying growth of cases, and we wouldn't have this unbelievable death toll.
Yeah.
All it would have taken would have been just, for us to take a couple of months off, and we, a lot of people would be alive.
Yeah. Well, Steve, there's no eloquent way to segue out of this, so I'm just going to do a hard turn. By the way, I echo your sentiments. So, very well said. But in Utero, well, Nirvana obviously blew everything up and had a giant album with Nevermind. But following that up can come with some pressure. Before we get into how you got into the project, I gotta say, from an outsider, it just seemed like Nirvana wasn't really the type of band that really cared too much about that kind of record label. Like, oh, how are we gonna do on our second record? I don't know how much you knew these guys ahead of that, but would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, they were socially from the same circles that I was from. They were an
Right.
underground band, and we knew all the same people. We played at all the same clubs. We were from the same scene, right? So we had a lot of common experience. They were in an awkward position in that they were now the biggest band in the world, and they were now sort of inexorably tied to a big corporation that was going to be making decisions on that basis, that they were a big corporation and they had a lot of money tied up in them. So I didn't envy their position at all,
Were you a fan of them at all? Did you know any of them personally, or?
I didn't know them before we started working on the record. I'd never interacted with them. Well, I hadn't knowingly interacted with them. It turns out I did have some interactions with Kurt when he was younger. When my bands played in Seattle, it turns out I had interacted with him, but I didn't recall it at the time. So I wasn't super familiar with their music. I wasn't the biggest fan of Nevermind. I mean, it was inescapable, so of course I'd heard it. But it didn't strike a chord with me the way it did with a lot of other people. Having gotten to know the band and see them work, my respect for them grew tremendously, and I came to become very fond of them as people and appreciate their music.
Well, let me ask you this, because with your background specifically, when a band kind of, like you mentioned, you were in the same scene, the same circle to a certain extent. When they, I don't know if there's a comparison other than certain bands, like the local guys, Husker Du and Replacements, both signed major labels. That's happened before, but it has a band like that just blew up and, like you said, became the biggest thing in the world. Did that seem almost, I don't know, to go against the grain of what the whole purpose of that scene was about?
Well, I mean, you have to understand, nobody begrudged Nirvana their success. Like, Nirvana they were a band that played the circuit, played all the same clubs that all of the rest of us did.
Right.
And everybody that knew them and everybody that interacted with them was pleased and proud and happy for them that they were, becoming successful and becoming a big band. There's a political issue with aligning yourself with a big corporation, and that I think Nirvana themselves struggled with. There is a cultural value to keeping things small and local and handmade, and when a band chooses to align itself with the corporatized mass market version of that business, they are making a statement of a kind, and I think that statement is the thing that seems at odds with the rest of the underground world, because it seemed possible at the time that you could become a big band and be influential and successful without having to become part of the corporate system, and a band like Nirvana certainly had that as an opportunity. Like, they could have achieved greater penetration and greater success and maintained more control of their destiny without getting involved in a big record label, but they chose to get involved with a big record label. So that is the thing that if anyone was critical of the band, that's what they were critical of. They weren't critical of their success.
Okay.
Their success was earned, and everyone recognized that. What they might have been critical of would have been the decision to get involved in the corporate music scene in preference over helping to grow the underground and the independent music scene.
Do you think that kind of, I don't know, juxtaposition they were put in there was the reason you kind of got the call to come in to work on the follow-up?
No, I think it was, I'll take them at their word, and they told me that they had heard other records that I'd worked on, and they liked the sound of them.
Mm-hmm.
And they personally knew bands that I had worked with, and so they'd talked to them about working with me, and they'd gotten a good report from them, that I was easy to work with and that I was efficient, and the bands were happy with the way their records came out. I think it was a normal decision made for normal reasons and not an extraordinary decision made for some extraordinary reason.
All right, fair enough. And you ended up recording this, I don't know, not terribly far from where I'm talking to you from, at Cannon Falls, Minnesota, at Pachyderm Studios. That's a bit of an odd choice, even at the time, right?
Well, I had worked there on a couple of other records, and I liked the studio. The studio was acoustically really nice, had a great sounding mixing desk, an old Neve console that was in really good condition still. So I liked from a technical standpoint, it was a good studio to work in because it had a good organic natural sound at the studio, owing to the acoustics of the build and the equipment that was there. It served another function by being kind of secluded, and that was that it would keep drug dealers and creeps and hangers-on and gawkers away.
Okay.
Like if they had recorded in a big city, and then they would have had access to all of the social environment of the big city, and Kurt had drug problems, and everyone, the people involved in that band and were concerned about risking a relapse, and so it seemed wise to try to do it in a somewhat isolated environment so that there wouldn't be temptations around them. There wouldn't be people trying to track them down and get them involved in parties and drugs and misbehavior.
So even you were aware of the issues that people were concerned with Kurt?
Oh, sure. Everyone was.
Okay. And as far as the members of the band, was this flat out only a Kurt issue?
I only ever heard reference to trying to make sure that Kurt was safe.
Okay.
Yeah. But the point being that, you can make a record anywhere.
Right.
And if you choose a place that has risk, then you are choosing the risk. If you choose a place that doesn't have that risk, then you're protecting against that risk.
I think they came across clear.
Yeah.
At least from my end. No, I've been to Cannon Falls a few times, Steve. Where I'm just trying to imagine, where did you guys stay, man? There's really not much going on there.
Well, the studio has accommodations built in.
So it's one of those studios where you kind of live at while you record?
Exactly. That's the premise of the thing, is that the band would go to an isolated place where they would stay on site, and that way there's no chance that they could get lost. There's no chance they could get waylaid between their lodgings and the studio. They wouldn't go out. They wouldn't be going out looking for fun. Like everything would be self-contained, and that whole thing worked out great.
Wait, so no fun. You guys never went to Peelers while you were in Cannon Falls?
No. You're talking about the strip club, right? There's like a strip club called Peelers. Yeah.
There was.
No,
I'm not sure it's there anymore, but
that's not really their scene, and certainly not my scene.
Fair enough. I'm just like, well, that is really the only thing entertainment, well, other than maybe your redneck bars, but. Well, how about this? Were they pampered rock stars at this point, or were they still kind of that just this is who we are kind of thing when they walk in?
Well, their nature was that they're just normal people. Like having a conversation with them was having a conversation with a normal person. They had been enjoying their fame and their money and their celebrity, and they, and they had been being treated very well by everyone they interacted with because they had become super important. But it was still quite novel to them.
Okay.
Like being famous was new, being culturally important was new. All of those things were novel at the time still. So they hadn't been personally affected by it that much.
I mean, that probably was made it easier for you.
Well, like I said, we had a lot in common already.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that, like, there were a lot of people who were sort of desperate to get involved with Nirvana. Like people who wanted them as clients for their management company, or like a lawyer that desperately wanted them as a client or whatever. And I made it clear to them that I didn't want anything from them. That I wasn't trying to become an intimate of theirs. I wasn't trying to get into their circle, their inner circle. I was an employee. I worked for them. I was there to do what they wanted me to do to help them make a record. And I think that put them at ease. Like, I think they could tell that I didn't have any schemes going on.
Yeah. And you took a flat fee for the record, is that right?
My intention was that it would be obvious that I wasn't there to play them in any way, that I was there to make their record for them, and that was it,
More like a peer.
Yeah, but also, it was clear that it was their record, and that I was there to help them make their record. They weren't working on a record for me.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sorry. I think I talked while you were talking there. But you took a flat fee for the record, right? Not a royalty.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much your standard path.
Yeah, that's I've talked about this at length.
Right.
But the way people like me are compensated in records at the time was structured in a way that benefited corporate players. Like if you're an administrator at a record label and you can hand out money to other people, then you become a bigger player. Then you become more important in the industry, right? And if you make a deal with somebody that grants them a lot of money, if it's the company's money, then you could get in trouble. But you can spend the band's money without getting in trouble. And so that's how that form of compensation developed, was that people started making deals with other players in the music business in order to make themselves more influential and more important. Mm-hmm. Those deals kind of inflated and escalated, and the deals involved spending other people's money. And if I were being paid a royalty on those records, my portion of the royalty would have come out of the share that would otherwise have gone to the band. Mm. So literally every dollar that I was paid in royalties would be another dollar that the band would not get. And they were already in the position of having a lot of people siphoning their income. Right. So I just, from an ethical standpoint, I cannot be involved in a relationship I cannot be involved in a scheme like that. It just sounds like a racket, and I just won't do it. I never have, and I can't imagine doing it in the future.
That's extremely principled. I mean, it would probably be a better world if more people approached things that way. But
well, I mean, I'll play not devil's advocate here, but I mean, I'll point out that everyone does behave that way in everything except record production. Like in every other thing in your life, if somebody does something, if you hire somebody to do something for you,
wedding photographers.
Yeah, you pay them once.
No, they come after you. They own your photos. They look. Some do, some don't. But the industry standard in that, look, it's an obscure reference. I don't know where I'm going with this, but yeah, they basically they you pay them to show up and take pictures. Then they charge you to develop prints, and rather than just say, well, here's the 1,000 pictures I took that you paid me to take, they want you. They give you like little proofs, and then you pick which ones you want, and then you pay them again for those.
Okay, well, all right. I'll admit that I would never that I haven't had that done for me. But I mean, let's say something normal, something
yes. A hamburger.
You know, you go get a haircut,
Okay.
right? You tell the barber how you want him to cut your hair. You know, all of it's your decisions. He cuts your hair. You're happy with it. You pay him and you leave, and that's it. Almost every other thing in your life, if somebody is working for you at your direction, you pay them for their time and then you're done.
Yeah.
And that just seems like a normal way to compensate somebody. It's like, you know, we have a conversation about it and figure out what it's worth, and then you pay me that much and we're done, you know? So I've just done every record that way. It just never made any sense to me to try to get involved in some elaborate scheme where they had to keep accounting to me for the rest of their fucking lives. It just seemed ridiculous, and I just won't do it.
How many records have you done? I mean,
how many individual records with different people?
I went through the list to kind of like see if I had any kind of other like quick hitter questions I wanted to hit you with.
I mean, it's got to be a couple thousand. I don't know.
It's amazing.
I mean, I've been doing it a long ass time, and I do a lot of sessions in a given year. So yeah, I would be guessing, but if I did some ciphering, I could probably get within an order of magnitude, but that's about as good as I could do.
Well, back to Pachyderm Studios in Cannon Falls there. Now, would you have brought a lot of your own gear? Or were you using... Yeah. Okay. Like, we get into some of the kind of technical geeky stuff, like specifically what kind of things do you remember bringing in?
Normally when I do a session, and this is true to this day, when I do a session at an outside studio, I'll bring a complement of microphones with me that I know will be suitable for different purposes, stuff that I can't necessarily count on another studio having an inventory of.
Sure.
So I'll bring a parcel of microphones, maybe a dozen or more microphones that I know will help me get through a session. There are sometimes some pieces of electronic gear that make the session go smoother. Sometimes it's technical stuff like an oscilloscope for calibrating the tape machines, or a certain piece of outboard equipment that is useful under certain circumstances. But Pachyderm was a pretty well outfitted studio from a technical standpoint. I don't think I had to bring very much outboard equipment. I think it was basically just microphones. There was one song that Dave Grohl had brought a drum kit that was pretty big. His normal sizes were a 24-inch bass drum, 15-inch mounted tom, and an 18-inch floor tom.
Oh, boy.
And there was one song, I can't remember which one, honestly, where he wanted to have a smaller, tighter sound. And I had a drum kit, a perfectly sized drum kit like that at home. So I asked my friend Corey Rusk to go over to my house and box it up and ship it to us. I brought this other drum kit with me. What else? I brought a guitar. There was a guitar that Kurt had expressed interest in. It's an aluminum guitar called the Veleno, Veleno. They were a relatively obscure guitar made in the 70s, made entirely out of aluminum. And I happened to have one. And I talked to him about it on the phone, and he asked if I would bring it because he was curious about it. So I restrung it for lefty playing and brought it up. And he ended up using it on a few songs. But other than that, I think everything else that we used was shipped out from a semi truck arrived the day before the session that had all of their backline in it, and they just picked stuff out of their out of their collection of equipment that they wanted to use, and they had it shipped out.
And you touched on the drums there. The drums do sound just amazing. And I know you were involved a little bit in that you were in the first episode of Sonic Highways. And Dave Grohl specifically talked about like working with you and what as a drummer, how much that meant to him. How do you approach, like when you're, especially the mixing end, I guess is where my question would come from. What are you looking for? How do you approach that? Like, this is my start baseline, and then I do this.
Well, the mixing is not really, the way I work typically is that you try to get the sounds together before you start recording. Mm-hmm. So, the first playback of a take should sound pretty close to the way you want it to ultimately sound. And that was definitely the case with Nirvana. Like, they had their Like their songs were well rehearsed. They're all excellent musicians, and once they had made their choices, like on a song by song basis, Kurt might use one amplifier or another, or use one guitar or another, use one distortion pedal or another. Like he would have very specific choices in his notebook that he had made already. And so once the sounds were kind of settled, then the basic recording typically sounded very close to the finished end result. So the mixing wasn't stressful. It's not like we were trying to craft a sound from nothing. It was basically just balancing the sounds that they had been working with over the course of the session that they were already happy with.
But drums can be a little trickier because there's so many pieces to a kit. I'm giving you a compliment that they're crystal clear. Pretty much everything comes across, and it without being dominating either.
Well, thank you, but I mean the arrangements are also admirably sparse, right?
Oh, fair.
Typically, there's a lot of dynamic range. So, like in the heavy parts, everybody's playing full on, and everything blends together into a band sound. Then in the quieter bits, there's quite a bit of space. Like Kurt will sometimes drop out almost entirely on the guitar, so you're just hearing the rhythm section. And then if you're just hearing the rhythm section, then it's dead easy to make the drums and bass sound great because there's nothing covering them.
Sure.
And then I had the luxury of working with one of the best drummers that's ever lived. Dave Grohl is a monster drummer. He's
Absolutely
highly regarded as a drummer, but I think he's underrated, even that,
I couldn't agree more. He's especially as a rock drummer. I mean, my lord. You touched on them as musicians. I think, full disclosure, not the biggest Nirvana fan here. I kind of side with you as far as like my feelings on Nirvana. At least a little I heard you say there. But Kurt has kind of a loose, sloppy feel to his sound that really isn't that sloppy or loose. I mean, them as a band are very tight.
I mean they had been touring a lot. They had been playing together as a band and touring quite a lot. These songs were well rehearsed. They had done a demo session when they were on tour in South America. They stopped into a little studio in Rio and did demos of all of these songs. So they had worked out all the arrangements, and there wasn't a lot left. There wasn't a lot in question when they got to the studio. They just needed to. They were basically just executing it. So we were done fairly quickly. The days didn't seem stressful or long. They were very productive. It was a lot of material, 15, 18 songs, something like that.
Okay.
But they were, more than prepared to do it, and everything went very smoothly.
But would you agree that, like, I think it's easy to kind of dismiss Kurt as a guitar player when really it's not, his style isn't something that anybody can execute?
No, well, I think he has a certain sense of the dynamics of the song. Like you can tell in his playing, like when it's meant to be sort of gentle and somber, like he plays to that emotional intensity on the guitar, and then when it's meant to be raging and explosive, like he goes all the way to 11. I don't think there's any black art to it. It's just that he was paying attention when he was putting the arrangements together and when he was writing the songs. Like this part is going to be low key, this part is going to be big.
I like that phrase, black art. Well, Rolling Stone ran one of those articles of like one of those 20 things you need to know about the making of this, and it said in there that you prank called Eddie Vedder from the studio. Is that accurate?
Yeah, there were a couple of prank calls that went down during the session. That was one of them. Yeah.
Oh, who are the other ones?
Gene SImmons.
Oh,
from
really?
The band Kiss. Yeah, he was trying to talk Nirvana into appearing on a Kiss tribute album, and they didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
But they didn't particularly want to talk to Gene SImmons, so they had me call and pretend to be Kurt. And that was pretty funny.
What did you say?
Basically, I just sort of bumbled my way through an excuse that would allow them to not do it without having to say they didn't want to be on a Kiss tribute record.
Oh my lord, that is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they were very fun-loving people. I enjoyed that session. They were fun to hang around with, and it was entertaining.
Kurt, this is Gene SImmons from Kiss. What did the record label think when they heard the record?
After we finished the record, I went home. I got a call a few days later from Kurt, and he said, "Yeah, everybody hates the record. Their management, the record company, everybody hates it. They want us to redo it." And I said, "Well, I think you did a great job. I don't think you should redo it." And he said, "Yeah, we love it." And then he called me back a few days later, and he said, "Yeah, we want to remix a few songs." And I said, "Well, I'll listen to it, and if I think I can do better on anything, I'm happy to fly out and help you with it. But if I don't think I can do better, then you're on your own. You can do what you want with it." But so I had a copy of the master, and so I put it on. I had a studio at home, and as discussed, and then I put my copy of the master on, and I listened to it played back, and I just thought it sounded great. I felt like we'd really wrung the sponge, is the way I would have described it at the time. Like, I felt like we got the most out of everything, and that it sounded terrific. So next time I spoke to Kurt, I said, "Look, I don't think I can do any better. I think all this stuff sounds fantastic, and if you want to redo some stuff, you have my blessing. I'm not going to be a dick about anything. Just I just feel like you really did a great job, and you should be proud of yourselves." And so they ended up making some small adjustments to a couple of songs, like added some backing vocals to one song, and I can't remember what the other little adjustments were. But they ended up remixing a couple of songs. But the bulk of the album, the bulk of the album is essentially the same as it was when we finished at the Pachyderm.
Okay.
And the record that made, and I said this at the time, the record that made its way into the stores is the record that Nirvana wanted people to hear, and it's their record, and they get to make those decisions. And so I have no gripe with Nirvana.
Oh yeah, no, I think that's clear. Now they did on the 20th anniversary expanded edition do one of the bonus discs was the Steve Albini mix. Was that was that the original mix that you were just telling about, or did you actually go back in and do like a remaster kind of thing?
Everything that was on that deluxe edition was all the original material, like the original mixes that were done at Pachyderm, and then the remixes that were done that were on the final sequence of the album. That was all, all of that was from the original masters. It was just remastered for better sound quality. And I'm very pleased with the way that record came out. I think, they let Chris Novoselic was kind of overseeing that for the band, and he was able to get the record label to cooperate with him and to do it, start to finish, to do it for the absolute pinnacle in sound quality. It was all original masters. They didn't have to use any production masters or copies for anything. It was a full analog master. That is, the whole LP mastering was all done directly from the original master tapes. It was all cut into metal. That is, instead of being a lacquer cut, they used the DMM process, which is a slightly better sound quality. Mm-hmm. It was, pressed as 12-inch 45s rather than a single 33 1/3 LP, and that improved the sound quality as well. Yeah, I think they really did a phenomenal job on that deluxe reissue. I don't know how to make a better sounding record. Just on a technical level, they did everything exactly the best possible way.
Cool. Well, I mean, that's refreshing to hear, but walking you back a little bit. So this entire thing was mixed while you guys were all still in Cannon Falls?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, the stuff
that's
that
part
I
of the 2 weeks of recording?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry. Yeah, that was part of the 2 weeks you guys spent there?
Yeah. I think the whole thing was done in 12 days.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing. Well, do you happen to remember what the budget for the record would have been?
I don't remember. I don't. I could work it out.
I'm guessing you came in under budget, right?
I don't think there was ever a stipulated budget. I think they just said, "Well, let's spend whatever it costs.
Okay.
This is how we're going to do it, and whatever that is."
That
I don't think there were ever stipulated. Let's not spend more than X on it.
Well, how about this? Do you have any favorite songs on the album?
I'll be honest. I'm not that good with song titles.
I got it in front
I
of me
think
if you want me to hammer down them, but
yeah.
well, how about this?
I remember at the time I really liked the way the band dynamic and the drumming worked together in the song "Milk It" or "Milkmaid," whatever. I don't remember what the final title was.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a kind of a brooding quality to the verses, and then the choruses really blew up in a really intense way. I thought that song came out really great.
Any special, I don't know, anecdotes or stories from the recording sessions? I mean, you did share that awesome tale of prank calling Gene SImmons. Is anything else from that time that sticks out?
Yeah, I can't really think of any.
I didn't submit these questions in writing ahead of time.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I'm not more prepared with an anecdote for you.
No, that's okay. How about just a memory of Kurt? Anything special there?
I remember when his daughter arrived, he was just beaming in her presence. Like I don't think I've ever seen a person happier about anything than him just playing with his daughter.
Do you stay in contact? I know it sounds like you worked with Chris on the deluxe edition of this, but do you stay in touch with him or Dave at all? I know you were on the Sonic Highways thing, but beyond that, do you guys still I don't know, talk once in a while?
Yeah, once in a while. Like I'll get a text message from Dave when he sees something that reminds him of me, and he'll or like yeah. I mean, we're friendly. I've developed my friendship with Dave and Chris has kind of extended over a long period of time, and it's developed more than it was at the time. At the time, we were just working together, and I think and I grew to admire and appreciate them more over the long arc of time since then.
Yeah, well, Dave said in that episode that you have a reputation of a cynical prick. Do you feel that's a fair statement?
I don't particularly care what other people think of me. So
that kind of cynicism.
I don't feel like a cynic. I feel actually like a quite positive person, but I also understand how other people's perspective is going to be different from mine, and I'm not going to get bent out of shape about it.
I use a term, and maybe you'll embrace this or you won't, but I call it Minnesota snark. And it's a climate thing as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, it seems like a lot of the bands like from here, and even like these Seattle bands, they kind of like embrace that kind of like I would agree, we're all happy people, but there is a little bit of snark to everything we do. But
I'm not going to take offense one way or another.
Fair enough. How about the track they recorded? Something or nothing? Something for nothing. Were you involved in? To your knowledge, did they have that pre-written before they got to your studio, or was that written while in Chicago?
I'm the wrong person to ask about that. Yeah, I didn't work on that session. I was just here.
Sure, yeah. No, I know it was they were bringing Butch along and using the studio in each city, but I was just curious. I would like to mention this, though. You did a record recently with Local H, Lifers. That landed on our show's year-end top 10 list, for what that's worth.
Oh, cool.
I can't remember where it came in. It was in the middle there somewhere. I was a little surprised to see you were actually you worked as you're listed as like an assistant engineer or something like that on the Jimmy Page and Robert Plant album, Walking into Clarksville.
Yeah, I was the principal engineer for that whole record. Yeah.
I mean, that's good rock royalty. That was. I mean, I know you worked with Nirvana, but when you worked with Nirvana, they were kind of fresh and current. And this is almost like the Beatles walking into a room with.
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly intimidating working with somebody like Jimmy Page and Robert Plant. Yeah, yeah. You realize there that you're working with people who have every reason to expect the absolute best performance from everyone they work with. And so it's somewhat intimidating to be in that position. I'm pleased that I was able to measure up,
Right on. A little jealous of you there, but and you're a pretty good poker player, it turns out.
Well, I do my best.
Yeah. Have you won more than you lost as far as money? We don't have to get in specifics.
Yeah, if you lose more than you win, then you're not a winner. Then you haven't won anything. Yeah.
Teletor quarterback. And one last little kind of small nugget. Is this true? I came across this getting ready for this, that you have a food blog. I wasn't able to find it or check it out today.
I used to. About 10 years ago, I was doing a food blog, just keeping a sort of a running diary of everything I was making for my wife, Heather. It hasn't been active for a long time.
Okay.
It got sort of overrun with spam bots, and it just got to be too much of a nuisance. And
are you a foodie?
Yeah, but there was for a couple of years there, I worked on it pretty regularly.
Are you?
I wouldn't consider myself a foodie. I'm a serious amateur cook. I like to cook. I cook every day if I can.
Nice. What is there a go-to dish?
No, I mean I cook a lot of Italian food just because that's I learned to cook watching my mom, and we're an Italian family, so I cook a lot of pastas and things like that. That's a regular, but yeah, I've been on a kind of a weird soup kick lately, where I've been making a lot of soups. I made a pozole the other day. Pozole is a hominy stew. It's Mexican in origin, but yeah.
Huh. I made a Tuscan pork stew last night. Slow cooked it, but anyway, we'll get up.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Yes, it turned out okay. Steve, I enjoyed this very much. I hope I was gracious and patient, and I really hope I came across prepared, because you're a pretty big deal.
Well, thank you. That's very flattering.